Hello and welcome to 60 minutes of unscripted .NET entertainment. Our mission is to empower the .NET community, that's you, to achieve more. I'm your host, Cam Soper, with my longtime friend and co-worker and co-host, Myra Wenzel. We would like to welcome today's guest. Now, I've already apologized to him multiple times. We've determined that I am like physically incapable of correctly pronouncing his name, so I'm going to go with my best effort, and we're just all going to pretend like I did it right. I'd like to welcome today's guest, Moaid. Moaid, please introduce yourself.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So my name is Moaid Hathot. I am a software engineer at Microsoft, currently working on Azure. Prior to joining Microsoft, I was an Microsoft Azure MVP, and I've been working with C# and .NET for more than 10 years. I'm also involved in the local community, where I usually host events, including the local .NET Conf. So for the last 10 years, I've been working with Visual Studio like almost any other .NET developer, but it was changed. And this change led me to author my first official NuGet package, which called Dumpify. And I wanted to discuss the path that I went through.
Sure. And so we were eager to hear this story because we've I think entertained some of the idealistic crusades in terms of tabs versus spaces, and what's the other one that we have come up on the show occasionally, Myra?
Oh my gosh, the pronunciation of GIF and GIF.
GIF versus GIF. And you know, we've certainly, I think, had a lot of spirited debate in the comments and, you know, elsewhere, you know, Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. And we got your submission for the show, and you're just like, Visual Studio Code, writer, I don't care. I'm gonna go with Vim. And that's where I said, wait, what? So no, I am fascinated, and I'm sure there's somebody out there who's going to chime in and tell us that Emacs is superior or Nano or whatever their text editor. Yeah, whatever. Moaid's going to tell us how Vim is the way to go, and how he used it to build Dumpify. So, by all means, Moaid,
take it away.
Yeah, so as I said, like most .NET developers, I started using Visual Studio, and I knew all of the shortcuts. I was really fast doing a lot of editing. I knew all of the advanced or hidden secrets, with hidden windows that you can show to debug. And like Visual Studio is really great editor. Like the debugging experience in Visual Studio, I think that it's one of the best in the world. So I thought to myself that I was really fast and proficient in Visual Studio, and I thought that okay, I'm done about everything regarding editing code. I know everything. I'm done. And that's changed when I watched a demo of a friend and a colleague of mine, and he used VS Code, but he could jump from one place to another. He did some like really fast editing that I never experienced before, and like I was in a shock. Like I thought that I was fast, but I was never that fast, and I was intrigued. So after the show, I talked to him about it, and he told me, yeah, he was using Vim mode in VS Code. And I was like, what? Because, for me as a Windows user, Vim is like this legacy programs that, weird Linux users work on the side. Maybe if they want to SSH to a remote terminal. So I was really intrigued, and he told me that we can work with VS Code or Visual Studio, but install some extension that uses Vim commands and Vim motions. So the Vim motions, it's like it's not a programming language in terms of Turing complete, but it's like a language where you like meta program, you write something to edit your code. And how it turned out, this is was really powerful. So I started using VS Vim. It's a Vim emulator on top of Visual Studio, and I started learning Vim. And I started to see the potential of using these Vim motions. So having said that, the learning curve is very steep.
And I think I probably have the experience level that most of our audience has, which probably is not a whole lot. I mean, because like you said, Vim is considered, relatively legacy. It's like something we think of as being from ages past. And like the only times I ever touch anything to do with VI at all is if I am, if I SSH out to a Linux machine somewhere that doesn't have Nano, right? And I'm like, okay, now what now? So I'm really eager to see what you're going to show us.
And for me, it's just the interactive rebase of a Git command. So it's like when you're doing that and you have to change the commits that are part of your rebase, and you're changing commit messages. That's the only time I touch Vim.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
that's all I know. I know how to exit Vim. I know how to exit.
Yeah. So before that, I was working as a consultant to a startup company, and they were using Linux. And I wanted to edit something, so they opened Vim, and I didn't know what to do. I said, what are these weird, why should I press D to delete something instead of backspace or delete? What? Yeah, so a lot changed since then, and I will show some of the Vim commands and Vim motions. So I started learning it, and the learning curve was very steep, because even though I knew, I learned the basic commands, but I had to think about what to use. And even then, what was more problematic was, retrain my muscle memory. Every time I wanted to do something, my hand went to the mouse, and then I just, had to stop myself and do it the Vim proper way. And I think that after a month, I started, I reached the level or the fastness level that I was before using Vim. And since then, I think that my speed is very improving, and it's always improving. So this was the first part, the part where I get to use Vim or the Vim extension over Visual Studio. And I started to hear people telling me, yeah, so ditch your editor or IDE and start using the real Vim or Neovim inside a terminal. And I was, what? It's a crazy people. What? I'm a Windows user. I used to interact with Windows and UI application. Why should I ditch it and use a terminal? And does it have syntax highlighting and auto completion or any other modern program editing experience? And apparently, yeah, it has. So like
Show
I
us.
had to overcome. Yeah, so let me show you.
Let's
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Yeah,
but
that's okay. Let me show you. Okay, so first of all, I also talk about my flow because my flow has changed. Using the terminal, like there are some tips and tricks to be really productive. But so I can just open Vim and I can do that, with an alias. So I can write nvim, or I can use the alias, which is my name. I will explain why it is in a few minutes. So okay, so this is Vim, and as you saw, like there's this startup screen that I configured. It has the shortcuts for creating new files and stuff that I do usually, and I also added my name just because I can configure everything. And here you have code, and I can write things. For example, I have a string,
So
and
I know
Yeah.
I know you zoomed out to make it a little bit more comfortable for your screen space, but could you maybe maximize the window and zoom in a little bit for us?
Okay, so let me zoom.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think that's better.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want a little bit more, Kim? You think so?
I'm sure there's probably some viewers out there who might.
Yeah. Folks. Yeah.
Yeah,
folks
that's a
in the
lot
chat,
better.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you can see that I have auto completion. For example, if I have a string, I can call to string and I can see all of the methods of objects and the extension methods. So I have, the normal .NET experience. But what is more than that is, as I said, like I have this Vim motions that I can do. So for example, there's an extension that I really like called Hope. So let's say that I'm at line number 1, I'm here, and I want to go to the function named demo basics. So I can do it in different ways. I can, for example, press 13, then a J. It's like I'm jumping 13 lines below, okay? Or I can use the extension called Hope, which is pressing S. And then if you can see, the first letter of every word is highlighted with a different letter. So for example, I will do it again. On line 13, the first letter is D, but after I press the shortcut that I configured, which is capital S, it's now G. And what happens is that I can just press on G and it will jump there. And I can do that not only for the first character, I can do it for any place I want. If I will press small s, for example, I can start and type 2 letters. Let's say that I want to jump here to the E and N in the word references. So I can just type EN. And now it shows me that there's an E here. So if I will write again E, it will jump exactly where I want. So this way I can jump from one place to another really, really fast. So this is an extension of Neovim that I really, really like. But let's talk about more basic stuff. So let me jump for a function, any function, for example, this one. And I can jump horizontally from one place to another using F and T. So if I will write F, then I, it will jump to I. And if I write a capital F, then O, it will jump backwards to where I wanted. And let's try to add some variables. So I will write here string first name and string last name. Okay, so now okay, so first of all, you can see that I'll also have editor notation. Yeah, so even though it's in the terminal, I have some modern features. But let's say that I wanted to delete everything in the parentheses in the function. So I can do D, it's like an delete. I, it's delete inside, then parentheses, and it will delete everything. I can also do the opposite. For example, I want to change from first name maybe to, I don't know, or maybe from instead of last name, I want to change it to family name. So I can write C, which is change. T will jump up to, but not including, then N. So it has removed the last, the word last, and then I can just write family. So this way, like this is a really basic Vim motion that I can use. And what I didn't talk about is that Vim has different modes. So the first mode is called normal mode, which is like the mode where we press the commands. I can't just edit code. If I wanted to edit code here, I had to press I. I is in insert. Then I can edit code. Or if I wanted to do a selection, then I have another mode called visual mode. So I can press V and I can select individually, or I can press Shift V and I can select whole lines. Or if I wanted to do some block things, then I can press Control Q and then I can select blocks, part of lines together. And with these abilities, I can do a lot of interesting things. For example, I can write even macros and use them, and maybe I will show them in a bit.
So I have a couple of questions real quick. So you pointed out earlier that you have like, inline the equivalent of the red squiggles in Visual Studio, right? So and I'm assuming this is coming from OmniSharp because down at the very bottom of the terminal window, is that listing extensions like Visual Studio Code extensions? What's going on here? How does this is this like Visual Studio Code behind the scenes?
Okay, so this is a really great question. Well, there's something called LSP, which is a language server protocol. It's a protocol where the language, like it separates from the code that can process and understand the language from the editor itself. VS Code also uses it, and Neovim uses the same protocol. So what happened is that everyone can install different language servers, and then the language servers can be started according to the extension of the file. Because this file ends with CS, then OmniSharp is automatically started, and Neovim will start to communicate with the language server, which this is OmniSharp. If you notice, I also have here Copilot and NullLS. So Copilot is actually the official Copilot, GitHub Copilot for Neovim. It's an official extension from GitHub. So it also provides auto completions and suggestions. And NullLS, it's a bit more advanced subject, but it's like a dummy LSP that can provide more functionality over the code that I have. So basically, you can edit anything in Neovim and get auto completion and ID modern feature if there's a language server that you can install locally, and you can do that for almost any programming language out there, including PowerShell, for example.
So I have heard of the concept of language servers before in the context of Visual Studio Code, but that just now made the connection for me, and the light bulb went off. That's a brilliant use of that. The other thing that I had that I wanted to point out is really just more of an observation. I've noticed that like when you showed us how to jump based on a character, for example, or you want to jump to one function, it replaced the first character with other letters to for you to use to specify your jump target. I noticed that those, and I think it was I if I'm remembering right, those were just like the QWERTY keys on your keyboard, right? Those were just like in order. So this is like okay, maybe not quite. So Q, P.
So you can define the order. in your configuration. Like I use a default configuration, and they defined letters that are easy to press. So like you can have either one letter, for example, like B and L, if the jump is close to you. But if the jump is further, then you have two letters. And they define the letters in such a way that if you press two letters, it will be easy to press in one hand, for example.
Okay, I get it. Yeah. So for someone like me, I'm 45 years old. I grew up with DOS and my earliest computing experiences were way before Windows. So I got used to memorizing hotkeys, right? So I'm watching this and watching how fast you're going. I'm like, oh, he's got all these memorized. These are all down. I bet you can really like grind and get some code written with this. Can't you?
He's
Yeah,
a 10x developer, but in terms of speed, I don't code fast.
What's cool about Vim and Neovim, and I will talk about the difference between the two, is that you can configure almost everything you want. And I custom configured Vim, my Neovim configuration in the way that makes sense for me. So, for example, you mentioned that I know all of the shortcuts. Well, there's a basic Neovim shortcuts that I didn't change, but the additional shortcuts that I added make sense for me. So, for example, I have like this demo basics method that I have, my cursor is on it, and let's say that I want to preview its code. So for me, it's space PD. It's like space preview definition. So it's like a shortcut that makes sense for me, but you can configure something else entirely. And let's say that I want to see all of the files that currently exist. So for me, it's space E in Explorer or File Explorer. So space E show and hide the File Explorer. And if I want to search something, so it's space S, space search, then I can provide what to search. So for example, if I want to search for a file, it's space SF, space search file. And then I can write here the file that I want to search for. So like this is why I can memorize a lot of the shortcuts, just because it makes sense for me, and anybody can change it whatever you want.
Do you have like I know personally, what has been I think transformative for me over the past few years is how everything lately has like universal search, right? Like Visual Studio has universal search, Visual Studio Code has like this command palette. Office even has the universal search where you can search for whatever command you want. Can you do anything like that in Neovim?
Not exactly. So I don't have a command palette of sort, but what we do have in Neovim is we have an extension called Telescope, which is what you see here. It's this UI that you can fuzzy search. So it's the it's a few levels of extension. There's Telescope, there's fuzzy finding, and there's the sorting algorithms. And everybody can add features to Telescope. So, for example, what I do when I want to find something, I can just press on space SG, which is like a live grep. So now, if I will write demo, I can search every instance of the word demo. I can't search for Vim commands in here. I can do it differently. I have space S, then I have, I think, help, which I can find the help of every extension and Neovim by itself, but don't have a single palette that can search everything. Having said that, we can add an extension that does that. So one thing about Vim and Neovim is that Vim, out of the box, they are bare bones. You can they have really basic functionality, but you can install the extensions that you want and that you need. and maybe there's an extension that I'm not familiar with for command palette.
I wanted to go to this question, which is like they were asking for setup resources for Neovim plus C#. And so like for people that is like looking at the show today is like, I'm interested in trying this. Like I'm seeing that they have a neovim.io website. So is that where you start your setup, like get the basics, and then
Okay,
maybe we
so
can talk about how the extensions work?
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So there's two ways to configure Neovim or Vim. You can use a distribution, like a packet, like a Neovim or Vim in a package that already contains shortcuts and extensions that other people already didn't configure. And this is how I started using the terminal. I used a distribution called Lunar Vim, which already supports C# out of the box. So I prepared here in my repo, and I will pass the link. But here's like there's a getting started links, and like there's the stuff that you need to install. And here you have the popular distributions that you can use. So there's Lunar Vim, Lazy Vim, and NVChad. I think that at least Lunar Vim and Lazy Vim support C# and .NET out of the box. I'm not sure about NVChad. Or you can also use my.file. So if you want, you can just go to my repository, which is this one, and you can look how I configured the LSP and how I added the extensions that needed for C#.
Very cool.
I was just grabbing that URL to.
Yeah, I will pass it in the chat.
Actually, I just realized that I am logged on as not the producer, which means I can't reply directly to.
I can put it on, no worries.
You can. There we go.
Yeah, so let me show you my configuration. So this is how I configure Vim. Like I use Vim to configure my Vim configuration. Yeah, it's
very meta.
Yeah, exactly. And so, for example, we talked about Hope. So you can just search for it, and we can see the shortcuts that I configured. In Neovim, everything is in Lua. So like there's a Lua programming language, and you can configure everything using it. And here are the actual keys and the order of the characters that you talked about when using the Hope, and how can I jump from one place to another. And so like, let's say that I want, like, for example, let's say that I wanted to change the theme. I can do that. So here I have a file called colors, where I'm currently using some Vim called Night Fox, but I could just change it with VS Code, okay? And if I will write here color VS Code, then this is like the VS Code color palette, or maybe some will like it. So I can do whatever I want with it. And here are the list of all of the plugins that I've installed. So like there's basic plugins for the LSP, and then there's like the plugins that I like to use. I also have a plugin for GPT chat inside Neovim and whatever I wanted. And another comment about using the terminal, but let me just minimize it for a bit so that you can see it better, is that when I started using the terminal, my flow has changed. And it did change for several reasons. It was like not productive using the mouse, so I needed to find different ways to interact with Windows. So I started to learn about Windows shortcuts. So if you will look on the start menu, we can see here that the terminal, the Windows terminal that I have is number 5 in the order. So I started to use the shortcut Win5 in order to minimize and maximize the terminal. And then I started to use terminal shortcuts. So for example, if I want to move from this tab of the terminal to another one, that I can do so, and I can go in reverse, and I can use the palette of the terminal. And the next question that maybe you wanted to ask me or the community is, how can I run this C# code? So let's say that I wanted to add here console write line, hello.net live. Okay. So how can I run it? Because we don't have here any any green triangle for F5. So what I can do is I can open terminal terminal within the terminal. So I configured a few. So I have this one that is a pop-up. I can use like this one or this one. Okay, I can configure whatever I want. And then I started using more and more the CLI. So .NET run is actually the command that I use in order to run my .NET applications. So I could configure something with F5, but I didn't I never reached the stage where I thought that I had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And here that I reached the point where I thought about creating Dumpify. So one thing that it's still not as one thing that it's still a pain in Vim is a debugging experience. There is a debugging experience using a library called Netcore DBG, which is maintained by Samsung for Tizen. But it's really basic. So for debugging experience, I have two options. It's easier writing logs for debugging, or revert and use Visual Studio for doing the actual debugging. And what I use is like a hybrid approach. So I tend to write more logs and tend to write more things to the console so that I can see them here, and or using Visual Studio for more advanced features. And what I started to notice is that, let's assume that I have a class. Let's call it person, and this class has so some property called first name, and let's say that I have another one called last name, and let's add them to the constructor. So I can press space LA, and you can see here that I have auto completion with preview. So if I press 6, then it's adding first name to the constructor, and then I can jump to the last name, and now I will add it to the existing constructor. So this is an object that I can create, and let's try to create an object. So new person. Okay, and now let's try to print this object. So if I will do console write line, okay, and I'll try to run it, what I will get is actually the type of the object, because this is the default 2 strings that we get from C#. So this was a pain for me, because I either had to go and add a 2-string method here, if that was possible, or if it wasn't possible, then I had to write custom code inside the write line in order to print what I wanted, and it was a pain. So this was the reason why I started thinking about a library that can dump or write any object in a structured way to the console. It's really similar to the dump extension method we have in LinkPad, which is an editor that we can use for C#. So let's try to add it. Again, because I'm using the terminal, I won't add it using the Visual Studio's right-click and add NuGet package. I will just use the .NET CLI. So it's .NET add package. And I use a library, like a PowerShell module called PS readline, in order to show the history of the commands that I have written before. And we can see here that I have already written the command for adding Dumpify, so I can just use that. So don't have to remember everything. I can build on the stuff that's already written. And so now we have Dumpify, and if you look on the CS project, we can see that it was already added here. So in order to use it, let's just do LSP restart, which is restoring the language server, just because currently OmniSharp won't automatically restart every time I edit the CS project, but it's really fast, so it's already done. And now if I will go to the variable and I print dump, we can see that we have already a function that's an extension method that's called dump, and we need to add the using statement. So using, and now if I will run the code again, it's .NET 1. We will see a table containing all of the properties of the object without the need to specify any of them. And we can configure whether we want only properties or maybe include fields, maybe include non-public members as well. We can configure whatever we want. And the goal of this library is just so that we can dump to the console any .NET objects that we have.
That's pretty cool. I actually write a lot of console apps as
Demos?
Mostly as demos. But I do a lot of IoT. Most of my IoT stuff that I write, I just write as console apps. That I can see that being very useful.
Yeah, and it can do so it supports custom formats for a lot of types. So for example, if I have a daytime now dump, it can.
And it has a pretty formatting too, so you don't have to worry about it. You just dump the object and then it takes care for you.
Yeah, so I'm using a NuGet package called Spectre Console behind the scenes. Spectre Console can render tables and UI elements in consoles, and I use that, I do all of the reflection, black magic stuff behind the scenes so that I can populate those UI elements that I can write with Spectre Console. So let's try and do more advanced stuff that it supports as well. So assume that I have here another variables. Let's call it Amin, which is my wife. And okay. So, and let's add another property here called spouse of type person. Okay, it's something like that. And now what I can do is that I can do something like that. Spouse and vice.
You have to be good at typing to get this together.
Yeah.
Right, so before you run this,
yeah.
Wait.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Well, I was gonna ask. I mean, that's a circular reference, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So it supports that as well, and as you can see here, it notices that it's a circular reference, and it can support it as well. What happened is that I think I was using reflection, like I was printing exceptions and reflection stuff, and even regular expressions objects, and they have a lot of circular references. So like this is why I like added this feature. So like you can print any complex object, and you can also do stuff like, for example, for arrays. So let's say that I have an array. Let's see like how we can see it. The warnings, because I have a function that's not used, that's okay, but we can see here that here's the array, the type of the array, the length of the array, and even the indices. And we can control whether we want to show the indices or not, or show the types or not. And it also supports multi-dimensional array. So let's use this one. And I can also add labels. So label is a text object that I can add for my dumps, like for my, just so that I can distinguish between them. So let's write here test two-dimensional array. And if I will run it here, then we can see that it's in a table, and below there's the labels that I added. Okay, so before continue forward with Dumpify, let's talk about something that Myra, you have asked. So we talked about Git. So my Git flow has changed in Neovim. What I started to use a package or an application, an open source application that's called LazyGit, which is a UI that we can see inside the terminal. And it has really good shortcuts that we can use in order to do fast operations. For example, here we can see that we have all of the changes. I can press A in order to mark everything, or I can press D in order to discard everything. If I was to mark some files, then I could do C and then commit, and Shift P or Control P to push the commits. So like this started to be part of my flow, working with a terminal, using other terminal applications.
So that where did that Git dialog come from? Was that a plugin?
No, it's okay. So it's not a plugin. It's an app that you install regardless of Neovim. You can do it in Windows.
And you're running it in the internal terminal thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Exactly. So let's look about other examples. So let's look about other examples that we can use in the terminal, regardless of Vim. So I mentioned fuzzy finding. So fuzzy finding is a way that you can search for things without you write the text or the string exactly as it exists. So for example, if I will go to FZF, which is the fuzzy finding application that you can install on Windows, then I can basically search for everything. So if I wanted to search, for example, for something called let's see here, maybe this print hoods, I can just print hoods, and I can see it here, and enter, and it will write it here, and I can basically search for anything I want. So this is also a utility that I use to search for files inside the terminal without leaving it. And I find that it's a bit faster than the Windows Explorer search. Although, the pain of fuzzy finding is that it has some unfamiliar syntax, at least for me, in order to configure it. But other than that, it's really fast. Um, and what I wanted to do with Dumpify is the ability, to use it in all of these utilities. So if you are using it with the terminals, and I wanted you to have colors, but I like when I first released the package, people just created issues asking me to add an ability to not only print it to the console, but only to provide it to change the output to different places. So here we can dump the object to the console or to the debug window of Visual Studios or of Visual Studio. We can do it for trace, or even have it as a text. And whenever you have it as a text, then you can also just dump it to your log file. So you can use it, to do that, or you can configure any string writer of your own, and you can decide where you want to dump the objects and values. And as I said, I want it to be very configurable because everybody has different needs. So for example, if you are writing if you want to dump an object, maybe it's an object from a library, but it has a lot of depth. So maybe it's bigger than your screen, and you want smaller than that, and then you can configure the max depth, and you can do that per the dump itself. So here you have max depth, and you can add it here, or you can do it globally. So everything you can configure either per dump as a parameter or as a global configuration in your code, and you can do it like that.
So this Dumpify project looks like something I could get a lot of use out of, because you had me at console, but then when you added debug, the debug
Window.
source, the debug window, or whatever we want to call it, and trace. Yeah, now I'm completely won over. This is going to get a lot of mileage from me.
And this is not something that you only have to use with Neovim. Like you can use it if you're using VS Code or using Visual Studio. It can be helpful for your console apps to just dump everything.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So a few comments about Vim and Neovim that I didn't mention. I used Vim and Neovim a lot, but I never explained the difference between the two of them. So Vim is a legacy software, even though it has newer versions. Neovim, it's a fork of Vim, which was forked in order to make it more extensible and more lightweight and modern. So currently I'm using Neovim, but most of the things that I showed here, you can use it with plain Vim. I think that Vim 8 and above, it should work. And in order to be honest, there are still some pains using Vim. So the biggest pain for me is the debugging experience. It's very lacking considering or relatively to Visual Studio, because the debugging experience in Visual Studio is very, very good. In Neovim, it's really basic, but if you are gonna compare the debugging experience of Neovim with, let's say, JavaScript or maybe even Python, then it's more than fine. Just some programming languages don't have really good debugging experience. The other thing is a learning curve, which here I'm showing my configuration of Neovim, the things that I showed you here. It took me a lot of time to configure everything. So I started with a distribution with LunarVim, and then I watched the videos that I linked in the getting started documents. But it took me a lot of time in order to configure everything the way I wanted. But I have to say that I had a lot of fun doing so. Because
I was just going to say, to that point, We had a viewer comment a little while ago that I wanted to point out to you. Just they were expressing their gratitude to you for sharing your configuration because they're using Neovim as their daily driver, and they pointed out that yeah, that your configuration is really helpful to them. So good job.
Okay, thank you. I'm really happy. Yeah, so like the Vim and Neovim community is like very active, but .NET and C# like they are not their main focus, and we need all of the help that we can get. So I'm really happy if I'm able to help users to start using Vim and Neovim with C# and .NET.
And I think you've covered this before, but someone just joined. They're asking like, what is the LLSP? I think you mentioned the ones you were using, but like just to like reiterate.
Yeah, so for C# I'm using OmniShop. There's a new LSP in the hood, which is the LSP that comes with the VS Code C# dev kit. It should be newer and more modern, but currently it has some licensing issues that Microsoft is working on fixing. So hoping whenever the license issue will be fixed, we can migrate using the VS Code Roslyn. This is the new name of the new LSP, VS Code Roslyn. So it should be more aligned with Roslyn than OmniShop.
Awesome. So, did you have anything else you wanted to show us, or did you were you winding down? We're getting close to our time box. Want to make sure that you get everything covered that you want to get covered.
Let me just cover another extension that I really like to use. It's called Harpoon. So here I have only two files. I have the CSproj file, and I have the program file.
You and I can have a file explorer there.
Yeah, it's really nice. And although that I have here two files and two tabs in Vim, it's called buffers, and I can move between the tabs very, very fast. But let's assume that I had a bigger project than this, and I had like many files, and I wanted all like, and there's two files that I really wanted to move fast between them. So what we can do is that we can use something called Harpoon. In Harpoon, we can add files. So I configured space A to add files to Harpoon, and then when I click space H, I can see the files here. So I already added them before, and like it persists what I have added, and we can change the order. But currently, program is number one, and the CSproj is number two. So what we can do right now is I can move between these files really fast using the numbers. So space one, go to the program, space two, to the CSproj, and it doesn't matter how many files you have opened here. So even if I open here some of the JSON configuration, I can still go to program, CSproj, really fast, and I can add, however, like how many files that I want. So this extension, like it's really make me more productive because I can just jump to the main files that I'm currently working on, even though I just drill down for other file for a minute or two.
Awesome. Yeah, and I want to comment on our viewers both on YouTube and Twitch have been having really not as, I think, contentious of a discussion as I expected with this week's episode. I thought a lot of people would be like, are you crazy? Why are you using Vim? Why aren't you just using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or Writer? But had a lot of good comments from viewers this week. One that was pointed out earlier that I want to point out because I agree. Here we go. M. Jones likes to say that the terminal is timeless, and they think that while mice and GUIs created an accessible user interface, it resulted in somewhat of a questionable result. And I agree. I love the simplicity of terminals. I certainly recognize their accessibility issues, but I am very comfortable in text-based apps. And honestly, I wish I had more text-based apps to use. I could do without the GUI, so much GUI in my life.
I agree, and like after getting used to using the keyboard so much, so currently whenever I'm browsing, web pages, like I feel pain because I need to use the mouse in order to interact with the site, and I'm missing, the terminal experience where I can just use, shortcuts and keyboards just to move around.
That's awesome. Well,
Let's
with
show.
that, is that a show, Moaid? Was there anything else you wanted to throw out there for the viewers, or should we wind it down?
No, I just wanted to say that it was really fun being here, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, that goes for our viewers too. Remember, we are the community-focused stream. We delight in having community members both inside Microsoft, outside Microsoft, in the MVP program, not in the MVP program, just some person on whatever social media network that you had an interesting blog post that maybe you want to share or something like that. Drop on by the form that's on the banner right below us, and submit your show idea. We would love to have you on the show. With that, I want to thank Moaid, and also I want to thank you for letting me mispronounce your name this entire show. And
that's okay.
Again, my humble apologies. My
better.
My Midwestern U.S. mouth just can't wrap my tongue around those syllables. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
So thank you to all of our viewers for watching on .NET Live. Please do check out our other streams on .net/live. We are on there almost every week. We have a lot of friends here in Microsoft that have other streams on .NET Live TV that we hope you will find some combination of informative and entertaining. Tune in next week. Next week, we're going to have Eric Jensen on the show talking about EF Core Power Tools CLI. You won't want to miss that if you do anything with EF Core. You're going to love this. With that, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.
Bye.